All right. Thanks very much for joining us, folks, this morning. I'm Rob Howard, and this is Tristan Davis, and we're from the Office Developer Platform, and we're excited to be here today to talk with you guys about everything that's new in Office for developers here at Build This Week. In this session, it's going to be pretty demo-packed. We're going to try and give you an overview of all the different things that are going on in the Office platform, give you a bunch of demos to actually see what it looks like, and then give you a bunch of pointers to the rest of the Office sessions that are going on this week where you can learn a lot more and dive deeper into these technologies. So we want to start off by giving you a little bit of a frame around Office 365 as a platform. For a lot of people, when they think of Office 365, they first think of the suite of apps and services that we have for productivity in the workplace. We've got best-in-class applications for doing everything from authoring to chat and sites to analytics. Underpinning all of that, we have concepts like Office 365 groups that help you organize across all of those applications and modes of collaboration. We've got the Microsoft Graph, which you've heard about a lot already today, and you'll hear a lot more in this session and in other sessions this week. And then, of course, we've got the most stringent security and compliance and productivity services in the world, meeting the most stringent customer requirements around this, underpinning all of those apps and services. What we're going to talk about today is actually the developer opportunity that those apps and services present. As you've heard today, and hopefully you've heard over the last couple of weeks, Office 365 is huge and growing. So we announced last week that Office 365 in commercial alone now has 100 million monthly active users. Every month, there are 100 million people using Office 365 apps and services at work. That's growing. That's a 35% growth in commercial seats year over year in this last quarter. And now 90% of the Fortune 500 uses the Microsoft Cloud in order to get work done. And people are increasingly using third-party integrations with that. Over the last year, we've seen 300% growth in Outlook add-ins alone. We see similar sorts of growth in things like the Microsoft Graph, and things like extensibility throughout Office. We're seeing a lot of excitement around new applications like Teams and the developer opportunity there. In addition to all that usage and all the time that people spend inside of those tools, there's a huge amount of data that's generated. You see things like 2 billion or more meetings created every month in Office 365, which is a massive amount of data. It's representative of all the different sorts of data that people create in Office 365, documents, organizational hierarchies. And these things are really valuable context for applications. Understanding where a user is, where they need to be, when they're busy, who they're meeting with, are all really powerful things to connect to when you're building a productivity application. And we use those to generate a bunch of insights that make our applications more valuable and can also be consumed from your applications in order to make yours more valuable. We've seen a lot of excitement over that. In the last quarter alone, we saw 150% increase in the number of users using third-party applications connected to the graph. So we're really excited about the momentum there. We do want to talk about kind of what this actually looks like from a developer perspective. We talked about the apps and services in Office 365, but we look at it a little bit differently when we talk about it as an opportunity for developers. So we're going to go through that really quickly, and then we'll dive into each one of those segments and tell you a little bit more about what that looks like, show you some demos, and point you to some new sessions. So when we talk about the developer opportunity that Office represents, we start with the Microsoft Graph. You've heard a lot this morning already about the data that's in there. It really started with the notion of people and groups, organizational hierarchies that are inside of systems like Azure Active Directory. When we layer in data from Office 365, things like your files, things like your calendar and your contacts, those things create a richer network, richer relationships between those, and richer applications as a result. We've now got a bunch of places where communications and devices that can engage in those communications are layered into that same graph. And probably most importantly, we're computing a bunch of insights between those things to look at relationships like who works with one another within an organization. What are the most important documents to a particular user within an organization? Or who's an expert in a particular topic within an organization? And this creates a really rich graph on which you can build really powerful productivity applications. On that foundation, we build both our own applications. We talk about them as canvases here. We'll talk about that in just a second. But we also make it available for developers to connect to directly for their own web, device, and service applications through simple REST JSON services and also through a variety of SDKs on like 10 different platforms at this point. Within our applications, we have a series of what we, for developer purposes, call canvases. These are really end-user specific experiences for specific tasks. So things like authoring documents, having conversations, engaging in collaboration, building pages for sites and portals. We have best-in-class experiences across all of these things. And they're things that you shouldn't necessarily think of as a one-to-one correspondence with an application. When you think of conversations, they certainly happen inside of Outlook, they happen inside of Teams, but you can also think of things like the review comments in the margin of a document as a conversation. And when you're authoring an email inside of Outlook, you can think of that as a document authoring experience. And we really want developers to think about those canvases as the things that they're extending, rather than having to think about individual applications or applications on different form factors or platforms like iOS or Android or Windows or Mac. And some of those canvases are canvases that we actually let you embed in your own applications. So you can take conversations powered by Skype for Business, and you can put them in your own web and device applications to create communication experiences that are embedded in custom applications. And you can do the same with document authoring experiences by taking Office Online and hosting it inside of applications that host content that is Office documents. Within those canvases, we offer the ability to extend them with new behaviors. You can teach those canvases how to do new things that Office doesn't natively know how to do. And those extensions, in some cases, are kind of basic building blocks that work across all of the canvases. Things like new actions or commands, things like new task panes, dialog boxes, events that you can inherit from and that you can be triggered by. And that works equally well across each of these canvases. But there are also types of extensions that are very specific to a canvas. So if you think about something like a bot or a connector, this is very specific to the notion of a conversation. And it can be part of conversations across all the different applications where you have a conversation canvas, like Teams and Outlook. And you'll see how we're bringing that developer platform in a unified way to those different canvases across applications. And the last piece of this is that within those canvases, you can also create custom content. You can teach Office about new types of content that we don't natively understand. And there's a continuum there where you can start with very simple things, basically declarative text, where you just want to get a little bit of data into one of these Office experiences in a declarative way and let us handle the user experience. Or you actually may want to own and maintain and customize the entire experience, whether that's through Fabric React-based controls in the case of something like the SharePoint framework or a custom visualization, or that's something like complete HTML and JavaScript controls where you're using libraries like D3.js in order to create a very custom visualization inside of like Power BI or Excel. So this is kind of what the frame of the Office platform looks like. These are the places where you have an opportunity to connect in or to extend our experiences or to embed your content as a developer. And we're going to, for the rest of the talk, kind of drill into each one of these places. We'll talk about the Microsoft Graph. We'll talk about these canvases. We'll talk about some of the opportunities for acquiring and deploying these things near the end. And along the way, hopefully give you a sense in a visceral way through demos of what they look like, and then pointers to a bunch of places where you can learn about each one of these things in a lot more detail. So we'll start off with the Microsoft Graph. I'll hand it over to Tristan to give you a sense of some of the scenarios and capabilities you can get through it.
Awesome. So as you've heard, Satya and Scott and Harry and now Rob talk about, the graph really brings together people, activities, and devices, right? It gives you access to all the data intelligence up there in the Microsoft Cloud. But what does that mean in practice? So we really think about 3 different kinds of interesting scenarios you can start to build today by connecting to the graph and the set of Office services that back the graph. The first one is just a ton of rich content, right? And context about all the people that are represented in the graph. Like, is this person out of the office? I might have an app that wants to execute a workflow, and it can tell, oh, Tristan's out of the office, so that workflow should automatically be routed to his manager. Well, that means I need to know who my manager is. You can tell me things like, where do I need to be next? You saw in the keynote this morning that Cortana can be enhanced with skills that can let me see what's going on in my day and really help me plan out what I need to do. What documents have I been working on recently? Can I really bring all of that relevant context from all the places I'm using Office into the graph and expose it to you as developers to build really purposeful applications? Second one is deep insights, right? So there's context, which is just, what have I been doing? And then there's what are the insights we can glean from all the signals we're collecting? Like, what documents are potentially most interesting to me? I have a set of people that I work with, that I do email, that I have meetings with. What's interesting to them? And by proxy, what might be interesting to me? The graph can give you access to that level of insight. Given a group of people, what potential times can they meet? You saw Yina showed Tact. Tact was able to, with a single call to the graph, say, hey, here's a set of folks. Find me the best possible time for that set of folks to meet. Or, hey, Given a topic, who within my company has expertise on that topic? Who can I potentially go to find more information? Again, we can glean information about people from their profile and the things that they're doing and turn that into insights that are exposed as APIs up in the graph. Third one is real-time updates. So we now have really deep support for things like Delta Query and webhooks in the graph. You'll see a ton of that in Yina's session. I'd recommend spending some time there this afternoon. But you can do things like, oh, I can see every time a meeting changes, automatically detect meeting conflicts, and reschedule. So you can imagine combining that, what's a good time to meet, with the fact that I can tell every time a meeting has changed and turn that into a really powerful automatic update scenario. I can see when files are changed. I can see when mail comes in and execute workflow. I have a ton of ability to not just see what's in the graph, but see what changes in the graph and react to that in an event-based way that's a lot more powerful than potentially just query, query, query. So what I want to do then is just get into demos. The first thing I want to show is the Graph Explorer. So you saw Yina, as she got off stage, said, go to graph.microsoft.com. So that's where we're going to start. Number 8. So I've gone to graph.microsoft.com, which is our documentation site. So if you go there in your browser, you'll have all the docs and samples and context about the graph you could ever possibly want. We also have this really fabulous tool for exploring a graph we call Graph Explorer. If you've played with it before, please come back. We've done a ton of work to enhance it and turn it into a really powerful tool for exploring the power of the graph right here within the browser. So you can see right off the bat, I can query graph using a sample account, but I'm actually going to sign in with my own tenant. And once I've signed in, I can now go and query the graph right here to get a sense of the content and context it can give me. So we've got a great set of getting started queries. I can go and look at my profile. It returns me all the data that's stored about me in Azure Active Directory and SharePoint, aggregated into a single view of me. I can go and get my user photo. I'm very happy. I can go and get my email. Probably nothing super interesting there. And then you can click down here, show more samples, and see that for every workload on the graph, we'll have a set of starter queries to give you a sense of the kinds of things you can do. And each one of those queries, like if I turn on mail, close that out, I now have a really interesting set of potential queries I can run against mail. So if I choose my high important mail, there I'm querying. I don't have any mail with high importance. I guess that's a good thing. And you can see right here what the query is that's running for each one of those things. So in this case, I'm just calling me/messages and filtering on importance is high. Let's actually play with some of the new APIs, though. One of the announcements we're excited about making this week is that the Microsoft Teams APIs are going to be in Graph in preview. So let's show you how we can actually use the graph to integrate with Teams and play with a lot of the main content and context there. So I've got Teams open in the background. You can see that I've got this demo prep group where I've been talking to myself a bunch. I'm a very lonely guy. But let's actually augment that team. So the first thing I'm going to do is go in. I'm going to call, since this API is in beta, I'm going to go to beta. I'm going to say me, and I'm going to say, hey, what teams am I part of? And you can see that the Graph Explorer will do autocomplete. It'll suggest things that are in the graph that you might want to try out. In this case, I want to see what teams I'm in. Run that query. And it'll return back, hey, you're in a single team, and here's what that team is. The cool thing is because every team is backed by an O365 group, I now have an ID to that group. So I can just go grab this ID right here, turn around, and say to Graph, hey, what group is that? So I'm going to call it groups. I'm going to give it that ID. And you can see that immediately I have access to that group through Microsoft Graph as well. So I can start to Splunk in. I can say what channels are in that group, because we know it's a team. And we'll see that both of those two channels, April Sprint demos in general, are there. Maybe I want to add a third one. So I'll just go and create a really simple post query and say, hey, I want to create a new group. I want to give it display name, build maybe. Seems appropriate. Give it a description. Very excited about being here. So there's the description. Call that post. And what I'm going to do is now through the graph in real time, I'm creating a new channel. So you can see its success. I got a 201 created. If I jump back over, you can see immediately back here in Teams, that channel was created. And there's the build 27 team. So now that I have that channel inside of the team, I can go and add chat messages to it. So let's come back here. Let's go inside of that channel. Again, we got the ID of the new channel that was created, so we'll just copy that. We'll come back up here and we'll say, hey, let's go into that channel. You can see how simple it is to start to navigate all the pieces that make up the graph. I'm going to go and say, hey, I want to create a new chat thread. I'm going to, again, post because I want to create something.
Plural. I think you missed an S.
Oh, thank you. I love pair programming, let me tell you.
It's good when you have somebody checking your work.
It's awesome. So you can see what I'm going to do is create a new chat thread via a post, and that chat message is going to create a new root message whose body is, let's change it from some content to like, hi everyone. See, I'm desperately reaching out in my channel. By running that query, again, I'm going to get, what did I do wrong? Let's get rid of that maybe.
You got an extra closing brace, I think.
Oh, I did. There we go.
Oh, no,
Nope.
you got the chat threads at the top.
That's what I got. So let's go up and improve my copy-paste skills and remove this, which is not JSON at all, and run that again. What you'll see is this time it will succeed, and if we jump back over to Teams, I've been able to create a new chat thread inside of Teams. So I can go and create them, and really from my custom app, integrate with all the pieces of Teams. I can create Teams, I can create channels in Teams, I can create chat threads inside of those channels as well. You can even see that every team comes with files, so I can jump back here, go right back to the group that backs the team. Just by hitting /drive, I'm now looking at the drive that backs that team inside of that O365 group. Let's go create a file inside of there. So I'm going to go in the root, go to the build 2017 folder for that channel, and create a hello build text file. And that, this time I'm going to do a put because I want to create a new file. And then the body of that file will just say hello build. And you'll see that again, through one simple call to the graph, I've been able to go into that group, find the drive associated with that group, and create a file inside of that drive. So I got a 201, that file's been created. And indeed, if we come back here and go to the Files tab, we'll see, with a little bit of propagation delay maybe, that that file's been created. Let's give it a second. It did succeed. There it is. If we click that text file, we'll see hello build showed up. So very quickly, I'm able to spelunk through a bunch of different pieces of the graph and show you how you can now include teams in all of the full cornucopia of things you can do as you go build your own standalone apps on top of the graph.
Awesome. So you got a quick tour around the Graph Explorer, a bunch of new improvements there. You got a quick tour around Teams being now a part of Microsoft Graph. We're really excited about the connectedness of the graph and how you can really quickly go between things like your directory, Teams, files, really fluidly across them. As people have started to adopt the graph, and we've seen a huge uptake in that really over the last 6 months especially, we've started to notice a few emerging patterns where people are starting to use the graph more and more in these scenarios in particular, and really more than this, but these are a few that we'd call out in particular. One, and kind of the first thing that people really do with a graph is this notion of smart pickers. When you have, hey, you're picking a person or a document, and you can tell a person, here's what you've worked with recently, or here are the files that are most important to you. That's a really fluid experience for the end user. When you can show up inside of Outlook and you go and attach a new file, or you go to attach a file to your mail, and that shows you all the files you've recently been working with inside of Office across any device. It's a really powerful experience inside of Outlook, and custom applications can build on those same sort of capabilities to build smart picking experiences for documents and people and other things inside of the graph. We've also seen more and more kind of graph-connected devices, where people are taking devices and they're connecting them into the graph to understand things like your calendar and your schedule, your profile, who your manager is, the documents you've worked with. You saw a bunch of demos in the keynotes earlier this morning along those lines, so we won't sort of belabor that point. Another one that we're seeing more and more of, and literally we're seeing thousands of these being created a month, are graph-connected bots, where people are creating bots that by sort of authenticating you and connecting to the graph, they understand more about you and are more helpful as a result. And we'll walk through a demo of one of those in particular in just a second. And then one of the last categories is this notion of intelligent business processes, where all that context and all that intelligence, you can imagine making workflows much more seamless. When you understand that somebody's out of the office or who their manager is, or who people they work with most often are, or when they're available, it makes workflows more seamless. And we see a bunch of patterns where people are taking things like serverless Azure functions and they're connecting them to webhooks in order to string together really fluid business processes across that. And we'll see a demo about that in just a second. So I'm going to start with a really quick example of graph in bots. There's an AKA URL here that you can use if you want to go check out the GitHub repo for this sample. And I'm going to switch over to this machine and show it. I'll say, This sample was created as kind of a quick start by Richard DiZarega. I think he's actually here somewhere. If you don't know Richard, Richard's an awesome member of the Office community. He does all kinds of awesome work in Office dev. And he created this quick starter project. You can go check out the repo. It shows you really quickly how to build a bot that's connected, that's built on bot framework that uses Lewis for language recognition and is connected to the graph in order to know more about the user who's connected to it. For this demo, I just took his repo and I cloned it down. I attached it to my own application and my own Lewis model, and I've got it running here. So I'll just run it exactly like Richard sort of built it. It's going to publish that as a website, and then I'm going to run the bot framework emulator in order to interact with that bot as it's hosted as a website. Since that comes up, one of the things that bot framework launches, one of the things that I'll kind of show you guys is Lewis. How many people have used Lewis before?
Awesome.
I hadn't really used Lewis much before this. I've been really impressed with it as I've sort of built out some of these projects and investigated the scenario. I'll dive into it in a little more in just a second. First, I'll show you what the experience looks like right now. I can start by connecting to that localhost service. I've got a chat experience against it. I can say hello. Lewis is going to look at that text, and it's not going to recognize any of the intents that I programmed in the model. So it's going to say, hey, here are some things that I know how to do. And then I can tell it things like find all docx, or find all, I'll say, Word files. And Lewis understands that I'm searching for files. It knows that in order to actually answer that question, it's got to authenticate me. It uses a magic number here so that I can sign in with my Microsoft account. I'll take this magic number, and I'll pop it back in. And this sample includes all of the work in order to stitch those things together. That magic number approach is really nice because you can even use it in group settings, like in Microsoft Teams, so that each user can identify themselves to the bot, and they can be tied back to their identity in the Microsoft Graph. And then you can see it's actually going through my OneDrive, and it's finding all of those Word files. It understands other things like find all XLSX files. And if I go and flip over and look at the code there, after this one comes back, you can see it's using these cards in order to show me some of the results. If I go and flip over and look at the code there real quick, you'll see that it's using Lewis in order to recognize these intents. This first intent is when it doesn't recognize anything, it's going to tell me what it can do. But then it has a search files intent where it's pulling out the entities, like when I said Word or when I said .xlsx. There's a whole bunch of statements here to try and match the different things that I could be searching for to actual queries that it's going to augment in the graph. And then it's just going to go to the graph and do drive/search, put in that query, and it's going to return all those files back. So the actual code here is relatively simple. Lewis is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in order to recognize all the natural language and passing me those entities. I'll show you really quickly how I can teach this sample one more skill. So I'm actually going to go and show you Lewis really quick. This is the Lewis model, and I imported it from what Richard actually published in his repo. And if I go and look at the intents, you'll see the search files intent is the one that Richard sort of already had a sample for in JSON. And I've added one called next meeting. And it's a pretty simple one. I just put in a bunch of utterances around where do I need to go next, or where's the location of my next meeting, so it sort of recognizes similar language. And then I'm actually going to go back to my project. I'm going to add that into the bot so it understands how to respond to that. So I'll just put in the frame of this new function, next meeting. It will actually have a Lewis intent tagged as an attribute here, so it knows that I'm going to call this one when I recognize that intent from Lewis. I'm going to paste in the frame of this query and auth. So you'll see a similar pattern here where I'm calling calendar view with a start date, start time. I'm just grabbing the next one, so the top one, and I'm selecting location, subject, start. And I'm putting in, I want to look for things between now and a day from now. And then I'm actually just going to set up the authentication, and I'm going to go grab the result. So the last piece I'll put inside is the actual call to the graph, where it's going to make that call to calendar view. It's going to come back with a JSON body that I'll parse through and grab the subject, the start, the location, and I'll put it into a bot response. And if I start that back up again, now when I go to my bot framework channel, I should be able to say, where is my next meeting? And Lewis will recognize the intent there, and it will call into the graph and go look for my next meeting. It says, your next meeting is this breakout session that we're in right now. It's at 11:30, and it's in this particular room. And it embeds it back in the example. So you see a really quick example of this common pattern where you can, by connecting the user of a bot to the graph, understand a lot more context about them, and using things like Lewis, create really rich experiences really quickly without a whole lot of heavy lifting. Very little code there. So the next demo that I'll show in terms of patterns is around that notion of smart workflows, around intelligent business processes. And I'll show you a quick example of using Azure Functions in order to connect to the graph as well, in order to do really quick business processes. And this is a really pretty simple example. We've actually seen a lot of people build these kind of patterns. This one's inspired by an article that Jeremy Thake wrote a little while ago that shows you how to connect Azure Functions to the Microsoft Graph. What we're going to do is inside of the Azure portal, I've written this little Azure function. You can go check out Jeremy's article for the full code there. All it's going to do is when there's a new notification coming in from the graph, it's going to first check if it's a validation request when I'm setting up the subscription. And if it's actually a new notification about a new message, it'll call back into the graph in order to go grab information about that resource. It'll take the subject out of that resource, and it will call the Cognitive Service Translation API with the subject of that message, and then update using a patch request back into the graph the subject to be now in French. I don't actually read French, so I don't know why I would actually do this in practice, but say I did read French, and then that would be really valuable for me. So I'll actually go, I've got this Azure function running inside of Azure. I can go and grab the function URL. I can use the graph in order to create a new subscription to this particular user's inbox. You'll see what that looks like here. I'm subscribing to a resource, me/mailfolders inbox/messages. So I'm going to get a notification every time something is created inside this user's inbox. I can give them the endpoint for that Azure function in the notification URL, and then I can hit run query, and it'll actually go and create a subscription on that particular inbox. Unless my Azure function went to sleep, which is a distinct possibility, in which case I'll have to come back to this demo in just a second. So what's happened here is that I've actually got an Azure function that's running. You can see that I probably actually went to sleep. Yep, stream terminated. I will show this again in just a second. But what's actually happened here is that when I create this subscription, it's going to go first ping that endpoint to check and see, hey, is that thing alive? Is it responding to subscription requests? And it has to respond within 10 seconds in order to actually create the subscription. So while that spins back up, I'll talk for just a second about the value of this. And when I actually then create a new mail for the user, it will then call that same endpoint with the information about the resource that was updated, and it will then kick off the flow that's inside of that function. So if I go back into my graph function, and I go back into the trigger, check out the logs here, you can see that the function started when I triggered it. Give it one more try, and we might come back to this demo after we talk about canvases. OK, looks like it's asleep. All right, we'll come back to that one in just a second. We'll talk about announcements really quick on the Microsoft Graph, and then I'll show you how this is working once it's back up. So I'll hand it over to Tristan to talk about what's new in the graph, and then we'll finish that demo.
So tons of new stuff happening in the graph. There's a full session, like I said, this afternoon where Yino will spend a lot of time talking about graph. But there's a couple things you should really take away. One is the set of workloads, the set of data that's in insights and intelligence that's exposed on the graph is growing rapidly. We're announcing this week that Planner, OneNote, and SharePoint Sites APIs on Graph are all going to general availability. And then we're bringing a ton of new things into our preview ring. So you saw me play with Teams for a while there inside of the Graph Explorer. We'll have new and interesting insights about files you've used and files that have been shared with you. We'll have APIs around SharePoint lists, which I know has been a popular request. Outlook tasks, the Intune device graph, Office 365 reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So you can really see that we're spending a lot of time growing out all the things you can access using the graph. We're also spending a lot of time growing out the capabilities of the graph itself. So we have a bunch of great SDKs so far. We're announcing an SDK for JavaScript/Node, so whether you're a client or service JavaScript developer, and PHP. And we're announcing support for Delta Query and webhooks for Outlook. In Outlook's case, it's app only. Delta Query is now for users and groups as well as for mail and calendar, which is great. And we continue to build out the set of things that not only are exposed at a data layer, but the set of capabilities you can use to get rich notifications, whether that's through webhooks, through Delta Query, through really powerful idiomatic SDKs to access that data as well.
All right, and now we're back. So as you can see, I finally called this. The Azure function woke up. When I subscribed to it, it came back with a status code of 201, meaning that it was successfully able to create that subscription. I get an identifier for the subscription there. If I go back and I look at the graph function, you can see where some of those validation requests were coming in. And now if I actually go and send a mail, to rob@howard.cc, and I say, hello world, and hit send. I can go and check out my mailbox as it comes in. Give it just a second for the mail to arrive.
The tubes.
There you go. So it says hello world. If I go back and I look at the logs here, you can see the notification came in with this URL. The subject was hello world. It translated into, I'm not even going to try and actually say that because I would do it. There you go.
There you go. Excellent.
And if I go back and look here, you can actually see that the subject is now updated based on that function hook. And you can imagine much more elaborate examples by stringing together these sort of service or these Azure functions in kind of serverless modes where you're taking microservices and creating really complex business processes based on these inputs and outputs. And webhooks is able to make that happen in real time. Okay. So there's several different sessions. If you're interested in the Microsoft Graph, you should check out, especially Yina's session this afternoon, where she's going to talk about all the different capabilities of the Microsoft Graph. You'll have also a session on building file experiences through the Microsoft Graph with OneDrive and SharePoint. And there's a few tech talks where we'll talk about things related to the Microsoft Graph. Yina will talk again, and then we'll talk about creating add-ins that are connected to the Microsoft Graph through single sign-on. Let's switch gears here and talk for a second about how you can extend Office canvases with these web technologies.
Great. So you saw the 3 canvases Rob talked about, and really what we want to give you guys the ability to do is whether that's through extensions, through adding new capabilities to the apps, or through actually adding new content types on the canvases themselves, make Office more powerful, more tailored, more useful to the users that use it. And we really think about this, again, 3 big pieces. The first one is web technologies. Any of you who are familiar with the sort of modern add-in framework, whether that's SharePoint framework that we just announced or the add-in framework in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and OneNote, know that it's based on the web. If you can write a website, you can write an add-in and have that add-in really fit in deeply inside of Office. That support for web technologies lets us make sure those add-ins work cross-platform. So you can see up here we have a MacBook and we have a couple Windows PCs and I have an iPad Pro in my bag. The same add-ins that run on any one of those platforms run on all of them. And then we really spend a lot of time thinking about and tackling the problem of distribution. So if I had a quarter for every time I've had a conversation with one of you or any customer who says, deploying a COM or VSTO add-in is a pain in the butt, and here's the litany of things that I've had trouble with in that world, I'd have a Tesla. But really, we're spending a lot of time making sure that distribution in the future is as simple as, here are the users I want to have access to my add-in, click, and everything is automatically set up, and we'll demo that in a minute. So again, we'll just jump straight into demos, and we'll start with the document canvas. So that's really all the places where the user's doing content authoring, whether that's Word, and its document surface, or Excel, or PowerPoint, all the places where you're really creating content. So the first thing I want to show is something called Script Lab. So one of the things that my team spends a lot of time doing is living on Stack Overflow. So you'll see this call to action at the end about Stack Overflow. I think it goes without saying, if you have questions about anything you saw, if you start building stuff and you run into problems, go to Stack, use the Office.-JS or Microsoft Graph tags, and what you'll find is that you won't just get help from the community, you'll get help from us. So here's an example of a real question that was submitted about a year ago. Somebody asked the team, hey, do you guys have APIs for conditional formatting in Excel? And you saw they asked it at 2 o'clock, and by dinner time, one of the engineers who literally works on Excel had replied and said, not yet, but thank you for the suggestion. We're working on it. We want to get those to you as fast as we can. Well, one of the exciting things we're going to announce today is we're going to announce a set of Excel APIs in preview. So this is our 1.6 set of Excel APIs that includes support for conditional formatting. So I actually want to answer this guy. So let me show you conditional formatting, walk you through some of the API enhancements we're making, and then we'll come back and together answer his question, and hopefully he's still out there and is excited and we make his day. So isn't that what would make your day, knowing there are conditional formatting APIs in Excel in the universe? It makes my day. Thank you. So here, let's jump into Excel. And this is where Script Lab comes in. I don't just want to answer him and say, hey, we have conditional formatting APIs. Here's some documentation. I want to show him some code, right? I want to give him something he can put his hands on, he can play with, that helps him understand how the APIs work, what they do, et cetera. So Script Lab is a free add-in that you can go and grab inside of the Office store. And when you install it, it adds a custom tab to Word, Excel, and PowerPoint that lets me code, edit, and run JavaScript and HTML samples that make up an add-in right there within the applications. So I've actually preloaded this guy with a sample that I wrote around conditional formatting. And you can see that right here inside of Excel, I now have a window where I can have a bunch of code. So you can see that here's the function to apply conditional formatting that I wrote. It shows the simplicity, hopefully, of the JavaScript APIs. I'm going to grab the sheet called sample, grab a range within that sheet, add conditional formats to that range of type color scale, and then further down, I'm going to say, hey, the low end of that conditional formatting should be blue, the high end should be red, and the 50% point should be yellow. So super simple APIs that give me access to all of the conditional formatting capabilities right there inside of Excel. But not only can I show him the code and let him or her play with it, I can actually say, hey, let's just run it in here and see what it looks like. And you'll see that now the pane turns over. It takes that code and the HTML that backs it, turns it into an actual running add-in that I can play with. So I can hit add sample data. That's going to call another function inside of that JavaScript snippet that adds a bunch of sample data to the sheet. I can select the region that I think is interesting to conditionally format. So a bunch of temperatures that don't look like they're from here. If it's ever 101 here, I'll probably melt. But I can say, hey, what conditional formats exist? You'll see that it says none. Great. Let's go and add one. You can see that it called that function to go and add that conditional formatting to the sheet. And now if I go back and say list again, there it is. It knows about that conditional format. So really cool, and it doesn't just include the JavaScript, right? Like if I go back here, you'll see that this snippet has all those JavaScript functions that let that question asker see how that API works. It also has the HTML that we just used with the buttons to play with. So in this case, we're using our Fabric.js to go and add a bunch of JavaScript components into our HTML, and those are all documented, so you can jump back over here to dev.office.com, our dev portal, and see for every single piece of the Fabric UI framework how it works, what references to CSS you would need, what the HTML looks like, etc. So it really completes the circle, hopefully, and lets that person, whoever they are out there, maybe they're in the room, probably not, see exactly how to play with that API in a much more visceral way than just a code snippet embedded into Stack Overflow or me pointing at documentation. So if I jump back here, you can see that I already went to the bottom and said, hey, based on your feedback, we're announcing Excel APIs 1.6. Said, hey, I built a snippet that lets you go and play with it in Script Lab, and now I can just submit that back. What he can do is just that script, I've exported it from here as a gist. So if I go back here, you can see that every single one of these snippets I can export as a GitHub gist. So it'll have a public URL that he can go and hit that'll have all of the pack of that data, that code, the HTML, the CSS references, any metadata I want to send along with it. He can go and import it into his own run of Script Lab, tinker with it, change it, and really deeply understand how that API works. So hopefully pretty cool stuff. So we can go back here and tell him, hey, post. More than 2 links. All right, we're just going to say.
You have a poor reputation, apparently.
Rob's right. It's a dirty little secret. So you can see that now I went back and I was able to answer his question and hopefully enable a bunch of new cool scenarios with both an awesome new set of Excel APIs and a really powerful tool for getting to know how the API works and playing with it right there in the cuss inside of Excel.
I hope we really did make his day. That was pretty awesome.
Yes. Cool stuff. So the other thing I want to show really quick, and the Surface Book is waking up, my most favorite feature. So probably the single request I've heard the most, Rob might say the same thing, is, hey, can we do single sign-on inside of add-ins? The user's signed into Office. Why can't they just give me that identity token so they can be signed into my add-in as well? So here I'm using, let me smile, off the shelf. This is Office Insiders Fast, so there's no secret build here. I'm going to boot up Word. We've built a really simple sample add-in called add-in SSO, so I'm going to install that add-in. And what you'll see is that task pane loads, and down at the bottom, without me doing anything, without me signing into any dialogues, entering my username and password, it knows me, and the same me that's up here is down here. And not only am I signed in, I can now take that identity token, hand it to my own backend service and say, hey, can you exchange this for a token that lets me call the graph? And as a result, my add-in can go and make calls against graph and pull all of that rich data, all those insights inside the context of an add-in. All the user had to do was sign into Office, and I have access to their entire world, which is super awesome. So that's really exciting. And what does that look like behind the scenes? We'll open it in VS Code really quick, because I love how simple this is. There's the set of lines to go and get the access token. Let me zoom in, because it's so small that which is just, I'm going to call context.auth.getAccessToken async. It's going to return me an access token. It's that simple. And now I have an access token, a JWT, that is the user's identity, and I'm off to the races. And then I'll jump down here. You can see that once I have that token and I exchange it for a graph access token, I can go and make that /me call. It's like, again, 10 lines of code, and I'm going and grabbing all the profile data that matters about me from the graph. Didn't have to just grab profile data based on what my app asks the user to consent to. I can get any of the data up in the graph in the context of that add-in. So it really brings together all the power of the graph and all the power of add-ins into a really simple experience. So there's a great tech talk on that on Friday. I'd recommend you go. You can even win a Bluetooth speaker, I've heard, for going. So please go and take a look. Tim will spend a lot more time about the details of this. Bunch of great announcements around the canvas. We talked about how there's a bunch of APIs generally available. You'll see us just shipping APIs as fast and furious as we can. Also making sure add-ins run everywhere users run Office. So we now have add-ins on Outlook for iPhone and on the Mac, all kinds of great places. We're excited about the new SSO API and bringing a bunch of new great functionality to the document canvas as well.
We have a bunch of sessions here, especially a lot of tech talks around the document canvas. There is a specific tech talk on Office Add-in SSO, so I definitely recommend checking that out. We're really excited about that feature. We have a panel on Thursday where Tristan and myself and a bunch of other people, Yina, will be on stage to answer any questions you have. So we'd love for you guys to come and grill us.
Bring your hard questions.
Yeah, bring them.
Stump us.
All right, so we'll talk pretty quickly about Conversation Canvas. You heard a lot about things like Teams this morning. We think Teams is a really important application in Office 365. It's one that brings together a lot of different experiences, not just persistent chat. It sort of breaks out of this kind of chat bubble and brings together a lot of the canvases from Office. You can do document editing, you can do conversations, you can integrate through the graph like Tristan showed. And we in particular have a couple of things that are new at Build this week that we want to actually show you guys really quickly here. And then there's a team session where you can dive in to hear more about it. So the first that we're going to show is actionable messages, which is a capability that you might have seen inside of Outlook from before. So this is a capability where you can take a connector, or in the case of Outlook, an email, and you can put in a little bit of extra JSON in order to describe, hey, here's a card that has some interesting information on it that will show you an update of an item in line inside of Teams or inside of Outlook. And the same code works in both of those places. And we recently added in Outlook the ability to add actions there. So you don't just get information pushed to you, you can actually take action on those items. So you can see here actually a card from Rike. Rike is a service for task management and tracking that Tristan and I were using to track a whole bunch of to-do items around putting together this talk. You can see that we had some changes to the give the talk task. Apparently I was taken off of it. I don't know if that was a message to me based on sort of some demo that failed or something. I don't know. Probably Azure function problem. But you can also see here at the bottom a bunch of different actions that it's offering me right in line. So I don't have to go back to Rike in order to interact with this. I can actually say, hey, I want to go here, and I want to either add a comment, and I get a rich text box here in order to add a comment. I can set a due date, and I get a calendar field here. Or I can change the status and say, yep, we're actually in progress right now, and hit save. And that'll actually go back to Rike, and that will change that status in the Rike service. So if I go back and I look at my Rike workspace, and I look at give the talk and refresh it, you'll actually see, I didn't even have to refresh it. It actually just shows you in progress there on the board. So I don't have to do this context switch. I don't have to sort of get out of the flow of Teams in order to work with not only all the things inside of Office 365, but things in partner solutions as well. So we're really excited about actionable messages. And just to kind of show you, another one of those examples, that same connector works the same inside of Outlook. So when we talk about things like that conversation canvas as being something that's unified across Teams and Outlook, you can write one set of code and it can work in both places. You'll see that I can do those same sort of operations inside of Outlook when I've configured that connector there. And there's no different code that handles those two cases. So we're really excited about that. I'll also show you another capability inside of Teams that we're really excited about. So this is when you think about connectors and actionable messages, this is really valuable for the service to push something to me so that I can see one kind of feed of everything that I care about and have a conversation about it. But sometimes I don't want it to push something to me. I actually just want to have a conversation about something. And Teams offers some out-of-the-box interesting things. It's got Giphy integrated. It's got a bunch of stickers that I can put up there. You can see I was really excited about how Teams and Graph showed up in all of the keynotes earlier this morning. And now we're actually opening this up to third parties as well. So you can see here a series of apps that offer what we're calling compose extensions. So that you can, within the compose well of Teams, extend it with new capabilities that are service connected. So you see here an example that's connected to Visual Studio Team Services. I'll select that to say, hey, I want to connect to Visual Studio Team Services. What you see is it's not an experience where I have to remember a bug number or go search for it and sort of embed it in here. Actually, I have search directly in here. So if I know Tristan's working on a bug around, hey, we've got a slow response from a form, I can search for it directly from within there. I can click on it. It'll actually embed that directly in the conversation, and I can say, how's it going with this bug? And I can mention Tristan. He'll get a notification. He'll see the full context of it, and he'll be able to deep link into that notification, either directly in a tab or in the website, depending on the right sort of integration there. And you don't actually have to use that builder even. If you actually sort of want to treat this like a command line, you can do the same thing inside the compose well. I can mention this VSTS bot. It'll even give me a menu of what are the things that I can say. It's kind of like IntelliSense for Teams, which is this spectacular concept. And I can say, yeah, I want to search work items. And I can type in that same thing where I can say slow form. And I can get, again, that same experience just typing it in. So it's a really nice experience for pulling data in to have conversations around this within Teams so I can stay in the flow of that sort of unified experience across Office 365. So those are a couple of quick laps around new features inside of Teams. I mentioned a few of those things. You've got actionable messages and compose extensions in Teams. You can also extend the activity feed now in Teams. So the bell up top where we've previously reserved it to tell you about all the new activity inside of your Teams and channels, third parties can plug in there too. So you had a CRM system that plugged in and there's a new lead and you want to inform a user. You can put that right up in the bell. The user can deep link into a tab around that CRM system. We've also got some updates for Skype for Business. Skype for Business now has a bot framework channel, and there'll be a Skype for Business session later in the week where you can learn more detail around that. And the big piece of news that we have around Teams is that all of those extensions, the capability to create new tabs, new bots, new compose extensions, new alerts, integrate with the activity feed, that's all available to all developers now. Any developer can submit a new app through the Office Store starting this week, and you'll be able to show up in in-app galleries in Teams so you can be acquired by the people who are starting to use Teams now. So really excited about all of that. There's a bunch of sessions this week on the conversation canvas, whether you're talking about things like Teams, and there's a session this afternoon in particular on Teams and the developer platform where they'll dive into a bunch of stuff around that. But also things like Outlook and extensions inside of Outlook, whether you're talking about add-ins or connectors, and Skype for Business and the new bot framework channel that we have there, a bunch of capabilities around that. And you'll see a bunch of partner sessions too in Tech Talks where you can go and talk with partners and hear from partners who've done integrations with Teams and Outlook and hear information about how it went and why they found it valuable to go and do it. Next one we want to cover is the page canvas. And for us in the page canvas, the primary place that we're talking about that today is within SharePoint. And SharePoint is a really important workload inside of Office 365. It's actually one of the biggest and fastest growing workloads, one of the biggest and fastest growing parts of Office 365. And it's really important for a few different scenarios. Number one, it creates these digital workplaces, things like portals and intranets. And we have a bunch of award-winning portals and intranets. Many of the world's top portals and intranets are built on SharePoint technologies from brands like Hershey's and Goodyear and NASCAR and Kraft Heinz. You can also create business applications that are based on the data and the documents that are stored in SharePoint and OneDrive. There are integration tools like DocuSign that can integrate directly into the experience to say, hey, if you want to sign a document that's stored inside of SharePoint, you can connect those services together. And we now have a bunch of tools like Flow, like Power Apps for creating custom business applications and workflows. And we have an ecosystem of tools like Nintex and K2 that connect directly to these as well, so you can create really rich business processes around the collaboration and documents that are stored inside of SharePoint. One of the big capabilities that we're announcing this week, and we'll talk about extensively this week and next week as SharePoint has a virtual summit, is the notion of SharePoint Framework extensions. So this is, again, teaching that page canvas to do new things that it hasn't been able to do. And I'll show you a really quick example of that, and then I'll encourage you to go to the SharePoint Framework sessions later this week in order to see the details of exactly how to build this. So SharePoint Framework is based on primarily React technology. So you can use HTML and JavaScript, in particular the React framework, in order to build very responsive, very capable, very quick experiences inside of the SharePoint experience. And the first piece of the SharePoint framework that we announced was the ability to build web parts. So new blocks of capabilities that end users could embed on a page and configure. And now with extensions, you're able to teach the page canvas itself new experiences. So you'll see a few examples up here. In this case, I'm actually extending this library in order to provide a warning that this library contains sensitive information. This is a custom app extension that I was able to create and deploy into my intranet based on the SharePoint framework and this notion of app extensions. I can also do things like customize specific field renderings inside of list views and document library views, which is a really common case inside of SharePoint. So you'll see this is a modern list. I'm able to do things like recognize, hey, these fields have sensitive information on it. So I'm actually using the SharePoint framework and some React templates to add a blur on top of phone numbers and emergency contact names that I can mouse over, and then I can see the actual contact information. And you can add new capabilities too. So I can take the sort of context menu and the capabilities that I have on this library of training classes, and I can say I want to add a new capability called open this class to the public, where I want to create a custom experience that launches a dialogue and lets me create a new business process around opening this class up. So those new capabilities for extending the behaviors around the app, around the rendering of specific fields, and around the capabilities inside of a list view are all part of this notion of SharePoint Framework extensions. And you can, if you're interested in learning more about how to go build those, you can check out the SharePoint Framework sessions that we have later in the week that Dan and Vesa, in the case of Power Apps and Flow, Karam and Marwan will be giving those on Friday. And then we have a few different tech talks, especially on Office UI Fabric and the components that you can build using React there and using them in your own intranet solutions. The last kind of stanza that we want to cover is on acquisition and deployment. So this is around the capability to, when you have an application or an add-in or extension that you want to go and acquire it and get it out to all the users in your organization. We have a bunch of new announcements here that we're really excited about. We're going to start off by demoing something that we've wanted for a long time, which is the ability to centrally deploy add-ins directly from the Office store to users inside of Office 365. And we're announcing that that's available this month. Later this month, that'll go out inside of all builds. I think it's right now in Insiders. And Tristan's going to go do a quick demo walking through what that experience looks like.
Great. So if you've seen us talk at Ignite, you saw us sort of talk about centralized deployment and getting that towards GA. So the couple pieces of feedback that we really have heard loud and clear through our preview that we've addressed as we approach GA. The first one is, hey, the admin UI is great, but I actually want to script a bunch of this. Can't that be done automatically? So what we've done is we've actually gone and built a simple snap into PowerShell that'll add a bunch of commandlets that let you go and deploy add-ins online. So let's just select and run this, and then I'll talk about what it does. So I'm going to go and log in as the tenant admin. Did I type my password wrong? I did. One day. Great. So while that's running, what you can see is that it's really super simple to script the addition of an add-in up into Office 365. So I've got just one commandlet that connects me to that organizational add-in service. I asked it to prompt me with UI, but you could use any of the tools PowerShell gives you to send secure credentials through. And then a new organization add-in commandlet that lets me go and say, hey, either in this case, I want to deploy an add-in that I've built internally. So it's going to grab the manifest from my hard drive or from a URL and put that up into the site. Or I can even deploy through add-ins from the store. And you can see here I grabbed the asset ID from the store and said, I don't want one of my local add-ins. I want to deploy an add-in that comes from the store. And while we were doing that, you can see that it successfully went and grabbed and deployed that add-in into my tenant. And then if I boot up PowerPoint, because in this case, you'll see that I deployed this add-in to Tristan D at Popstead on Microsoft.com, and he's logged into Office. When I go in, what we'll now do is we'll wait until first idle, and that happens super quick. And as soon as that first idle hit, the Picket add-in that I went and grabbed from the store was automatically deployed to me on the client. So I didn't have to go and touch this PC. There, in fact, was no changes that I made on this local client other than making sure that the users I want to give add-ins to are signed into Office. So super cool. Everything you can do there also works in Office Online and even works on the Mac. So we'll jump over to the Mac here really quick.
Which number is that? 6.
6. And here on the Mac, I will go back and show you that UI and what it looks like. So we'll log into the admin portal, and we'll go to what we're calling the O365 admin store. It's just a view of the very same Office store that you can get to yourself, but curated for admins so that an admin can go in. I can say, hey, I want to deploy an admin to my organization. It's not a local one, it's one from the store. And you'll get a specialized curated view where all the add-ins that are in the store by default show up in the admin center. You can actually submit add-ins and say these are only for admins. Like I don't want end users to get this. For example, if you're like, my add-in doesn't just require Office, it requires some back-end configuration, you can tell us this is an admin-only add-in, and then it'll be available for admins to deploy only. In this case, I can say, oh, following up on the announcement this morning that Scott made around DocuSign, I actually want to deploy DocuSign to my users. I can go and say add, and it will go to the store, grab the latest version of the DocuSign add-in, and let me assign that out as well. In this case, I won't just assign to me, I'll assign to sales team. So what I've done is I'm going to say, hey, I don't want to assign this just to Tristan, I want to assign this to an O365 group, and then everyone who joins that group should get this add-in by default. So going forward, I can now manage who gets access to DocuSign by just telling them, hey, go join this group, and all the right add-ins for a sales guy will be downloaded and installed on your machine automatically. So we'll do that. We'll hit save, and it'll go pull that manifest from the store. It will go and assign those ACLs in Azure Active Directory, and then I'll be up and set with that manifest file from my organization. And you can see now DocuSign shows up here, Picket, which we did via PowerShell, shows up here as well, and then other add-ins that my organization has are also up here inside the UI. But now that I have that, I can boot up Word. And again, just like you saw in the Windows client, I'm signed into Mac as a user who is in sales team and has access to that Picket add-in. And again, first time it hits idle in the client, Picket just showed up. And then with a little bit of propagation delay, the DocuSign add-in will show up as well. I won't make you sit through that since in real time, the add-ins deploy a little faster than they do in the real world. But if I go here and actually poke it, I'll force it to refresh. So I'll go here and say, hey, just do what would have happened on next boot automatically, and you'll see that it's downloading the add-in, so it's loading them again from the store in the background, and then within 5 or 10 seconds, you'll see Picket and that Office at Work add-in that I had and DocuSign all show up in the right places in my ribbon. So there they go. There's Picket. Now it's going and grabbing the next one, and any second, DocuSign will show up as well. So super cool capabilities that'll be available across Mac and PC in the browser, but like Rob said, by the end of the month, that will support scripting with PowerShell, will support the ability to deploy store add-ins, and will support the ability to load your own LOB add-ins as well. Really cool stuff.
Awesome. So the last demo that we want to show you guys really quick is a demo of AppSource. And you guys heard Scott Guffey this morning talk about AppSource and now how Office 365 is participating there. We've taken the whole catalog of the Office store and we've included it inside of AppSource whenever it sort of fits that business decision maker target. So if you've got an add-in that is targeting that user, it's acquirable through AppSource and the capabilities that they have there. Then you can now go to AppSource in order to go and find those add-ins. And this is really great for providers for the Office store for two reasons. One is because directly from within Office 365, you can now access that experience through AppSource. And you get more eyeballs through AppSource than you would have gotten through the Office store alone, and you don't have to do any new work. You submit in the same way that you've always submitted. We'll put it in all the right places. But two is that AppSource has a bunch of great new capabilities that add a bunch of value for SaaS ISVs. So if I go to an add-in, for example, and I say get it now, and I walk through this experience, and I continue through with it, as Scott mentioned, we'll actually take the lead that that user has consented to give you, and we'll take it and put it directly inside of the ISV's CRM system so that you can follow up with them. You can say, hey, if you've liked the add-in that you got and the free service that you got through that, maybe there's a service that you want to sell them as an organization. And that's a really powerful capability. It integrates with lead sharing, as Scott talked about, for ISVs that are built on top of Azure, so that our own sales field also gets those leads and can help land ISVs with customers. And I'll show just really quickly an example of the sort of data that you'll get inside of, in this case, Salesforce. We, of course, support dynamic CRM as well. But you can see a whole bunch of leads. This is actually blurred out because it's from a real ISV that's been working with us on it. But you see you get sources like it came from AppSource. You get the region that it came from, and you'll get name and company information that the user has consented in order to give through that lead. So really powerful capabilities for ISVs that are participating in the Office ecosystem. So we talked about a bunch of these announcements, in-app discovery for Teams, add-in analytics in Dev Center is one we didn't talk about, but is a really powerful capability where we're now providing ISVs who list in the Office store more analytics on people who visited their EndNote page and people who've acquired it, so they can see what their acquisition funnel looks like, and of course they'll get leads through AppSource when they've registered that information in the seller dashboard. So we've got a ton of different sessions. This is really just the same list, but it's the full list of things that are inside of Office. You can go and check out in the Build app. You can look at all the things that are tagged with Office in order to find each one of these. Please do engage with us. We're really excited about interacting with the community. As Tristan said, we're really active on Stack Overflow when you have questions. We've got a ton of samples to go check out, a ton of repos to go check out on Office Dev and on Microsoft Graph in GitHub. And we're very active on the Office Dev Twitter handle. If you want to look at announcements and follow all that's new in the Office platform, that's where to find us. I hope you guys have a great rest of the build. Please take a minute and give us a quick evaluation on what you liked about the session, how we can improve it for the future. And please do check out the rest of the Office sessions this week and learn a lot more about the details.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.